with the tafsir of Surah Al-Fatiha. Yusuf. Okay. We continue with the tafsir of Surah Al-Fatiha, reading from the tafsir of Imam Al-Qurtubi. And we're at the point of Maliki Yawmiddin. Now, Aisha Bewley, Hafidhullah, Hafidhullah, she is actually the one that translated this. And she's been in the whole issue of translation for a number of years. And she's pretty scholarly as a sister. So she translated the ayah, the king of the day of repayment. I personally don't like the usage of king. I think it takes away from a lot of meanings, but that's how some have translated. I think when it comes to these issues, like just leaving it as Malik or Malik, just leaving it in that way is sufficient. And we mentioned this before, the word king takes away from so many meanings because there's so many things going on in your head with regard to what it means. Like, in this time period where the whole political push is democratic society, the idea of king automatically goes to dictator, this, that, royal family, corruption, this, that. And so it takes away.
Also, king has, in our mind, it's like, okay, there is a boundary. When you would say king, there's always a boundary. It's not like he's the king of all the world. Or all
Right.
The Malik means, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala owns us. He owns us.
Right.
King has a worldly meaning, okay, there is a boundary.
And we talked about this before, but it's worth talking about it again. And I cannot emphasize this point enough. Some people may not like it because it requires some sacrifice. If there's no exposure to the Arabic language, at least at the most fundamental, basic level, the meanings are twisted. And even some people may not like this as well because we have a push towards anglicizing everything. And some of the Arabic speaking communities went through this. But even a distance from the Urdu language, because the Urdu language, from what I know of it, and I'm not an Urdu speaker, but I know some of the philosophy behind it, it has a lot of scholarship to it. And because it has a lot of Islamic scholarship to it, it's more advanced Islamically than the English language. It's more closer to the Arabic, and it just has more. There's more insight into it. That doesn't mean that the English is bad, but still there's a lot of work that needs to be made in order to get it to the level that we can say, yeah, we've reached a level where it's scholarly. It's not there yet. And that's why we mentioned that Dr. Ismail Farouki, rahmatullahi alayhi, he wrote the small pamphlet. It's very small, actually. I encourage you to read it. It's called Toward Islamic English. It's on Scribd online. And it's very basic, and he talks about key terms which shouldn't be translated. But the idea there is that some words shouldn't be translated. When it comes to the names of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, that's especially the case. We're already trying to understand what the Arabic means. We're distant from the Arabic already. And we're talking about the names of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. We're not talking about the name of a place. We're talking about who Allah is in that sense, or at least something that gives us a sound meaning. So, that's just an important point to keep in mind. In any event, the term Malik has a number of different meanings, like it is noted here, right? It's noted with the different emphases. I'm not going to get into that so much, but I'm going to focus more on the meanings themselves. Scholars disagree about which is the more comprehensive of the readings of the word Malik, right? Which one is the most comprehensive? So there's here. This is an important point that actually there's a lecture online. It's maybe about 6-7 classes, and it's not difficult to understand at all. the impact that the qira'at or the readings of the Quran, because the Quran is read in more than one way. It's not read in only one way. It's read in more than one way. And this is an indication of the richness of the Quran. The variance, the word variance is a term that they're using to talk about qira'at. There's on average 10, they usually say 7, but it's 10 agreed upon ways to read the Quran. Sometimes some people come here, they read in more than one qira'ah. Like the African imam that comes sometimes, he reads in different qira'ats. And so the issue that comes is that in that lecture series, they talk about how that impacts how we understand like Aqidah issues. This is an Aqidah issue. We're talking about one of the names of Allah. How we understand points of fiqh, how we understand different things in the deen itself.
So are you saying that the way we recite the Quran, we may understand differently or understand more, there's more insight?
Yes. We got so used to reading the Mus'haf only in Hafs. And we got used to like the translation is only rooted in that there's a lot of different meanings, like the richness that comes from this, right? And really here in this case is the one that has dominion, right? The one that has dominion here is the one that really has the ownership over things. And that's why, and that, see, this philosophy, there's a philosophy that comes out of this, a way of thinking. That's what I mean by philosophy. That when we start looking at this in the concept of mulk, that mulk is only for Allah. Then when we start talking about economic transactions, like right now, I was reading an article, it was about a year old. Poland Springs, you know, the drinking water. There was a case that was made against them that they said that they were selling just regular tap water, and they said this comes from a spring, that they're just regular groundwater that they took. And so, for instance, that's the level where the economy has gone, that we own the water, we own the airspace, we own the human information that's in the genetics. So there's a certain way of looking at things from that angle. This has impacted us in a very serious way. Some of the schools, I remember one of the mashaykh in Egypt was talking about this. Some of the schools, because the parents pay, so they pay and then they tell their teachers, I paid the tuition, I'm the one that owns the school. And you, because you're my child, you're the one that owns the teacher. Right? And so that becomes the concept that they have. That because I'm giving money, I'm the one that owns this, I'm the one in control here. And we lose the Islamic concept. Allah is the one in control. When the human being continues on that path, I'm in control, I have the power, I own this, I own that, I am the one, then, you know, that's the opposition to the character of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in regard to Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is Pharaoh. Pharaoh is supposed to be a leader. Pharaoh tries to take this position, the position of Allah. I'm in control of everything. So here, you know, that has created a lot of corruption in the Muslim world. That type of thinking has created a lot of corruption. The issue of, you know, I'm in charge, the power struggle. But here, the reality is that Surah Al-Fatiha is always destroying that idea for us. Because Surah Al-Fatiha, at the end of the day, between Malik and Maliki, right, with the extended out alif, both of those are telling us what is the nature of reality. You know, over in the internet right now, there's big, actually, I was thinking about you, but I got busy with the issue that Kobe died. right? Kobe Bryant, the basketball player. So a lot of people have been going back and forth, Muslims, not Muslims, about how to deal with him, this, that. You know, he's a personality that is in the open. But some brothers did some really nice talks with regard to that. Like, death comes to everybody. You know what I'm saying? And so this becomes the reality for us. That, you know, he had reached billionaire status. He was traveling in helicopters, this, that. So the reality of the situation is that ultimately Allah is the one who, and then this is another thing that's important. Questions started coming up because his daughter died in that crash with him. To who goes the wealth? Does the wealth go to the corporations that his money is spread out? Does the wealth go to the wife? Who does the wealth go to? And so that's the same, you know, these are the same concepts that are there. Like, who ultimately has power? Right? Who ultimately has power? Is one thing here that at the end of the day, with one command of Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, just one command to change the order of the affairs of things. Like, look at what happens in hurricanes. We have a normal order. By the sunnah of Allah, Allah allows certain things to happen and whole places can be destroyed. A tsunami can come, collapse everything. By one order of Allah to change just the nature of the universe, everything can disappear overnight. Just the sun going out of its orbit, so to speak. And so, you know, these are the things that we really have to think about. Like we talked about the issue of wealth. Like at the end, who owns all of that? What do you go into the grave with? So these various readings of the Quran, they give us a deep insight. And that's why we pause on Surah Al-Fatiha, so that every word, it gives us something to reflect upon the meaning when we're listening. Right? When we're listening to it. So they get into details, you know, about, you know, what's more general, what's not more general. These are scholarly, you know, they're reflections. You know, which one is it gives you a more comprehensive meaning with a lot of different meanings that wrap up into it. So that's the investigation right here. Right. So it is said that Malik is more general than Malik, since every king is a master, but not every master is a king. That's what we said. You know, when we start translating in that way, we start seeing there's deficiencies now, right? There's deficiencies that come. And we should remove any concept of deficiency that we have when we start dealing with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. And because the king has authority over the property of a master, right? That's what distinguishes the master from the king. Abu Ubaidah and Al-Mubarrid also held that opinion. It is said that master is more comprehensive because he is the master of people and other creatures, and so is more far-reaching and greater in his power of disposal, since he sees to the imposings of the laws of the Sharia. I personally wish that they would not have reflected in that way. I personally wish that they should have stayed with the Arabic language and not put us in the realm of the human dimension. You see what I'm saying? Because now we're in the realm of, you know, who owns slaves and who's in power and this and that. And the leaders too many times, they begin to think that about themselves, that they have that God status. So if I come and destroy a whole country. That's the mentality of the leader. But that's, you know, this is not, we don't want to associate that with Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. So the issue comes back down to, Yarhamukallah, issue comes back down to who truly has possession of the created order? Who truly has power over the created order? Let's remove ourselves from this political type of orientation. And then that reflection, it makes you, because when you think about it in that way, who truly owns things? Who truly has power over everything that exists? And we talked about Alameen, that one of the definitions of Alameen is everything in existence. When we reflect like that, our minds can only take us, if we have the right framework of reflection, our minds can only take us to see that human beings are all limited, the most rich, the most powerful. And then that puts us in another dimension. Wow, subhanAllah. Who is Allah in that regard? And so then when you bring in other ayat of the Quran, like the command kun fayakun is easy for Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. When you look at it that way, then you realize the question comes up, do we really know Allah? Do we really know Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala? Even I was reflecting recently when we talk about Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. When we look at this side, Maliki or Malik shows dominance. When we look at, Ar-Rahmah, right, or the concept of Ar-Rahman or the concept of Ar-Rahim, it shows, a sense of ease. It shows even a femininity, like a softness. Yeah, caring, right? Especially when you think about that, and when even the term Rabb. I bring that up. Why? Because this has become a debate for some people, using the word He for Allah, Huwa. So they want to wipe that out because they think that is addressing that we're making God a man is impossible if we understand everything in its proper place, right? And is impossible to attribute that. And also, how is it that women will approach Allah? Is it just dominance, or is there another side? And the same thing with men. And so we find that in who Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala is, it has these qualities. The names have these qualities that allow us to see from different angles. That's why it's important that we get rid of that type of thinking in which it has limitations to it. Abu Ali, are we clear or no? Or is it out of... Yusuf, you okay? Your neck is a little stiff, but you're sitting like that in the stiff way. Abu Ali said that Abu Bakr ibn as-Siraj transmitted from some of those who prefer to recite Malik, that Allah describes Himself as being the master of everything in His words, Rabbil Alameen. And so there's no point in the recitation of Malik because that would be a repetition. That's what they're saying. But in reality, the word Rabb is different than Malik. The word Rabb shows the issue of nurturing, the issue of taking care of, right? This shows more the side of power and domination. But that's how they reflect. Abu Ali said this is not a valid argument because the revelation contains many similar instances. Remember what we said, that there's two schools of thought when it comes to the language of the Quran. We said one school of thought, remember that? Said one school of thought says that there's synonyms and one school of thought says that there's no synonyms. Right? And so if there's synonyms, then that's valid. Then it's just kind of like a repetition. If there's no synonyms, right? If we say that there's no synonyms in the Quran, that means the word Rabb definitely has its own meaning. The word Malik has its own meaning. The word Malik has its own meaning, right? So each word has its own meaning that we should respect. So when we reflect, then what we're asking is, what does this mean? And if you see the word repeating itself over and over again, that doesn't mean that you totally understood the meaning. Because, for instance, think about it in this way. You're a person. You can be a male or female. You're a mother, you're a daughter, you're a wife, you're a husband, you're an uncle, you're a friend. All of those things indicate what? What do they indicate to? Oh, that's so nice, Yusuf. No, not the special side. What? Huh? Yeah, your position, your relationship. So that's the same thing. The words in the context of the ayah, they will take on a relationship. That's why, for instance, in Mudabbir al-Quran by Amin Islahi, even Imam al-Farahi, they focus on that. What's the relationship? And the tafhim is the same thing in the context. What does it mean? Sometimes in the more, I don't like to say classic, but in the more classic types of tafsir, one of the deficiencies that we find in them is that sometimes they're just repeating what's said. Like here, Abu Ali said. And then they go back and forth. And then you go to another tafsir and it will just take what Tafsir Tabari said and it will relate it. But there's no real deeper reflection. Right? That's why Shah Waliullah, Rahmatullahi alayhi, Imam Shah Waliullah, one of the things that he had proposed is that the most important thing for us is to understand the basics of the Quran and reflect upon them. To get to that point. This is important from a scholarly path, but it's important for us to get the technique. The technique of reflection. Shaykh Taha Jabir Rahmatullahi alayhi, one of the things that he said is that in order to get to the core of the meaning of a surah of the Quran, we should constantly reflect on it multiple times. Multiple times, like sit with it, with the relationship. Sit with it. Don't think that because you heard it, you read it, you studied it, you understood it. We do this with people too. We think that we understand people because we know things we don't let them be, right? So we kind of lock them in. And we do that with the Quran. It's just like, oh yeah. We do that with the sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, the same thing. Just like people are a world, the Quran is a world. The Quran is a world, but it's not just any world. It's the speech of Allah. So it's different than anything else. So that's the first principle, right? So that's important to understand, that each word we reflect upon it and we give it its due rights. So he says the revelation contains many similar instances where the general comes first and then the particular. One example is Allah's words. He is Allah, the creator, the maker, the giver of form. Right? Creator is general. And the giver of form is mentioned because it calls attention to what was created. So some people may say the creator and the maker is the same thing. Right? The giver of form is the same thing. All of those things seem to be the same thing. But this is the idea here, right? That the creator is general and the giver of form is mentioned because it calls attention to what is created and the existence of wisdom. So the idea here is that many similarities exist, but that doesn't mean that those similarities that we can collapse them. I think I hit that principle pretty hard, right?
Yeah, you elaborate the same concept, like there's no synonyms.
Yes.
That's the case.
But what's the goal of doing that? What's the goal of doing this, of saying this?
Reflection.
Yeah.
You understand more insight.
Yes, so that we're a little more like naqra al-Quran bi-tanni, like we're careful in our reading of it. We're a little more focused in our reading of it. And that's why we were saying, like, there's tools. The tafhim, the way that we read it, we're reading the introduction to the surah, we're good. Because we want to get the general idea of what's going on in that environment. And that's not so much speculative. Why? Because that has to be taken from the Quran itself. And it has to be taken from a hadith. To get the general environment of each surah, we can't make that up. That has to be knowledge. It can't just be personal 100%. So when we start talking about the context of the revelation, the first thing that we look at is what is the evidence to say that this is the context. It can either come from the Quran itself. The Quran is telling you what the context is a context which is talking about the hereafter. Is a context which is talking about Tawheed. Right? Is a context which is talking about right or wrong. So the tafhim creates that reality for us. And then that allows us to go in at least with some background and to ease ourselves. But this principle allows us to stop at every word. Right? It allows us to stop at every word and get some meaning out of it. So we can move on a little bit. So here, yet another example of particular relevance to the Fatiha is the formula. The all merciful, the most merciful, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. When Rahman is general for all existence and Rahim is mentioned after it to make it specific to the believers in the next world. Something made explicit by his words, merciful to the believers. Remember what we said? That the word, remember when we used the example of male or female relationships? Here the word merciful is given a relationship to the believers. Right. So because the word has a relationship to the believers, it takes on a type of meaning. It takes on a new type of meaning. So Abu Hatim said that Malik is more intensive when praising the Creator than Malik, right? And Malik is more intensive when praising the creatures than Malik, right? So let's stop at that for a little bit and let's try to unpack it. So he says that it's more intensive when praising the Creator. So they were looking for what is the most comprehensive in meaning. What is the most comprehensive in meaning? And so, for instance, you know, more intensive. It just to praise Allah in a more fuller way. The Maliki, right? With the short pronunciation. And Malik is more intensive when praising creatures than Malik, right? Things things that we find in the world, the creation itself. The difference between them is that a master in the case of creatures can be other than a king. When Allah is a master, He is also king, right? So now the human realm and the realm of Allah. When Allah is master, He is also being noted to be master and king, one who has dominion and control, right, and ownership. That Allah wa Ta'ala has both of those qualities, and that's why that's the difference between using them in the realm of the human realm and when we start talking about Allah. Right? One is that it can be applied to both the particular and the general. This is a little complicated, so we have to be a little patient with that. And so you can say master of a house, master of the land, right, and garment, in the same way that you say master of a kingdom. The second is that it is applied to the master of little or a lot. When you reflect on these two statements, you find that they are the same, right? That they are the same. The third is that you say master of the kingdom, Malik al-Mulk, not king of the kingdom, right? And so now that's where you begin to, that's where you begin to kind of differentiate Malik al-Mulk, that some human beings have power. You acknowledge that some human beings have power. You acknowledge that some human beings have ownership over things. But what kind of ownership do they have? And what kind of power do they have? Wait, I'm asking you a question.
In terms of human being, there's a limitation.
I'm listening. And in terms of Allah,
His power is always there. There is no beginning, there is no end.
so when the human being goes beyond the limitations, that's what we get other words like taghut and all of that type of stuff. Like you exceeded the boundaries, right? You exceeded the boundaries beyond where you needed to go, right? So Ibn al-Hasar said that That is the case because the word master indicates property, right? The word master indicates property, mulk, and does not necessarily entail kingdom. You see the difference between the two? What's the difference between the two? Master and king, or malik and maliki. What's the difference between the two?
Master is total dominant.
Huh?
My master is total dominant.
Uh-huh. No. How? Because here he says master indicates, here we're talking about master in relation to property, ownership. So he says that indicates property, milk, and does not necessarily entail a kingdom. Here, the thing about this, it may seem technical, it's like what the heck is going on here? That may be part of the question. But from the other side, subhanAllah, what we're also clearing our thinking about who Allah is, right, in this regard. So when we start talking about the issue of dominion, right, when we start talking about the issue of dominion, is basically the one who ultimately, is in charge of all of the creation, who all of the creation is in Allah's hands, so to speak, subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's in the power of Allah, right? That becomes the issue again. But the different thing, the different point that we got now is that even though these qualities are for Allah, ownership and dominion, that humans share in some of that quality. But again, like we said, with limits. Right, there's some limits. So here, because they're trying to figure out what is the difference between Malik and Maliki, right? So property comprises or consists of both matters, right? Of both matters, and so it is more intensive. So he's saying that that's to your point, right? That's to your point that the master has both of the qualities, right? The master has both of the qualities.
And in a little bit of worldliness in this word, so we can understand it. Otherwise, okay, there's a king, but most powerful, not the worldly king. Otherwise, it would be hard to understand.
Yes. All knowledge begins where? Does it begin in the thought? Where does it?
What you already know.
It begins from the senses. Even revelation comes to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He hears it. Revelation, the source of it is from the unseen, but how it comes to us is similar to what you're saying by the senses. Some way that we can know it by. So, for instance, the prophet comes to us. A human comes to us. Right. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ لِيُبَيِّنَ لَهُمْ. Right. That every Rasul or messenger is sent only in a way that the people can understand. So that messenger can clarify for the people. Right? And so that's the issue. Bilisani qawmi, by the tongue of his people. That means their understanding is not just an issue of language. So that goes back to the point that the Quran has the concept of taqreeb. It brings us close to the realities of the unseen by examples that are familiar to us. That's true. But see, they're in a technical definition. They're in a technical definition reflection, I should say. They want to know which one is, because they say that there's different variants in the Quran. We can use different things. And mostly we're using Maliki or Maliki. So they're saying, like, which one should we use to praise Allah? Which one has the most meaning? Because we can't, they're basically limiting to the fact that we have to take an action. So what is the best action? Right? And so that's why they're getting in this reflection. Right? So he had al-Hasar, he went into this discussion, and now he's bringing them both kind of together. That he said that is the case because the word master indicates property and does not necessarily entail kingdom, right? But property comprises both, right? Matters, and so it is more intensive, right? If you have the dominance, so to speak, that you have both, but you can be an owner with limitations. You can be an owner with some limitations. Some argue that Malik is more intensive because it has an extra letter. That's all Arabic stuff, right? And so that type of speculation, it doesn't take us too far. Well, sure, fine. You have, because it has one more letter, you receive more hasana. Okay, fine. But we're looking for the meaning here. We're looking for how it is that we get to the meaning. Right? It is said that it is not permitted to give anyone this name, nor call other than Allah Almighty by it. But Al-Bukhari and Muslim related from Abu Hurairah that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Allah will seize the earth on the day of rising and roll up the heaven in His right hand, and then say, I am the king. Where are the kings of the earth? Right? And so that's part of what led to the reflection that they had. I personally don't like starting off with that, starting off on the human realm in this point. I like to go into the meanings of the words, and then we can get into this. Once we get clear that Allah is not like a human being, then it's easier to have an understanding. But if we are in that realm of, we're thinking about humans are like this, and then we're thinking about Allah. First, we have to come to some words that are going to give us the meaning of who Allah is that have nothing to do with human beings at all. Right? So we have to wipe that out. And I say that especially because this is one of the most controversial issues in this time period. One of the most controversial issues. The issues of people being in power and doing whatever, is one of the most controversial issues that we can see. So Abu Hurairah also reported that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, the most abased man in the sight of Allah is a man who calls himself the King of Kings. Right? Imam Muslim, he added, there's no king except Allah, the Almighty. That's beautiful. Because now that brings equality amongst the human beings. And that shows that power and ownership, it comes with responsibility and rights. And the Sharia spells that out for us. The rights of ownership. How does ownership transfer from one person to the other? There's rights in that. It has to come by a contractual relationship. And it's the same thing. That right, we have the, if I'm going to transfer to you the keys along with the paper from the vehicle, from me to you, now you own it. For whatever agreement that's there, it could be a gift is a way to transfer the ownership. It could be that you bought it. It could be that I owed it to you because of a loan and I didn't pay back, and that was the agreement. Those are ways to transfer relationship. It's the same thing, like the issue of contract also comes with the issue of the relationship between two people, like male and female. Right? But the difference is in that type of contract is that the man does not own the woman. That's why the mahr comes to the woman, to show that he does not own her. Right? He doesn't own her. Right? The mahr comes to show that she has independence. Right? He's not buying her. She has her own right. She has the right to property. Right? And she even has the right to say, I don't like what's going on.
I understand the concept of
Mahr.
How does it show that the man does not own a woman? I don't
Because the mahr symbolic in the mahr is her economic independence. Right? Is her economic independence. And along with that, the fact that, her property is her property and everything that goes with that. Right? In the past, in India, you saw that even in India, amongst the Hindus, the mahr goes to the family. Like she's being sold off. So the family in the past, that was logical because the children were part of the system of the farm. So when a child would leave, it would reduce, it would cause some sort of injury to the family. And so there was compensation that was given for that loss, right? For the loss of the worker, so to speak. But in Islam, that comes initially is symbolic. They have their understanding. No, you're giving the woman some security to show her where you stand, and then along with that is, well, her property is her property. And we don't emphasize that a lot. We don't emphasize, for instance, annulment of the contract, fisq al-aqd. The contract can be annulled in the court system. There's reasons when that can be done. Of course, they have limitations. That's separate even from divorce. That's separate from khulla. All of that is shown. See, in the Catholic Church, that marital contract is for an eternity. There's no divorce in the Catholic Church. They do it, but there's no, technically speaking, the teaching, there's no divorce. And so Islam show, the point of saying that we have everything is by contractual relationship. But there's a difference between the contractual relationship that we that we use when we deal with things like a projector, or for instance, a pen or cars or this, and dealing with a human being, or like in this case, male-female relationship, right? We have to separate the two out.
What about the interpretation that when the mahar is given, that shows that, okay, who's the leader of the team? The husband and wife is a team, and then the family. That shows that, okay, look at the Gabri, it's in the Quran. Okay.
القوامة.
What is that?
القوامة. القوامة. Who? No, but the القوامة too is like, that's never, it's not going to fly 100% because even Imam al-Qurtubi, when there's economic issues, technically speaking, we don't like that. I've done khutbahs about that, and it has caused some problems because I've made the point that Imam al-Qurtubi is like, yo, the agreement is this. Sorry for using a little bit of like Philadelphia talk, but he said, Imam Qurtubi, he says, look, the agreement is that between husband and wife is there's some provision. If the provision goes out the door, she has the right to choose to stay or not to stay. The imbalance comes in immediately. So the issue also comes that, for instance, does she have more wealth than him? Imbalance is there. How do you deal with that? So either way, the core of the relationship is really going to be back to the issue of shura and respecting the authority of the relationship. Yeah, the man has leadership, but at the end of the day, there's not going to be any leadership if you don't have any buy-in. The woman in Islam is not just silence. That has become the custom, right? But the woman is not silence. The woman has her role and her place. The man has his role and his place. But if we're going to be using the traditional society framework, we won't be able to function in this society. There's some sisters that are making more money than brothers. See, what's in the fiqh is one thing, and what's in the examples of the companions sometimes is another thing. It's in the fiqh, but sometimes you see there's more fluidity and more looseness of issues in the times of the in the companions and the Prophet himself. Khadija, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Khadija had more money, and she was older than the Prophet. Which, if we talk about that in today's time, go marry your older sister that's rich. Young brothers are trying to do that because of their economic situations, but it's not from the angle of this is a person that it would be good to have a life with her. It's more for personal benefit because they want to come out of poverty. You see what I'm saying? So there has two different meanings. The meaning that we find with the Prophet ﷺ is not the same meaning that we always find amongst the people. Sulaim, you guys get what I'm saying or no? Or not really? That for instance, we're going to see things in the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the companions That's is more liberating, is more meaningful, is more beneficial to us in our how we conduct our relationships. It gives us more flexibility, different models. It's not just one model. Then sometimes what we see in the fiqh, right? In the fiqh, sometimes it kind of begins to limit. Not all of the fiqh, because I'm just talking about whatever it is that is general in the study. And what we see in culture, the culture especially limits. Like in Islam, there's no problem with a woman who's divorced, right, to be remarried. And technically speaking, she can marry as much as she wants. That's a reality. But in the society, we look at her bad. In the society, we say, well, you're a widow or you've been divorced, you stay in your corner. Where in the Quran and in the Sunnah, for the woman to stay in her home like that, locked away, that's a punishment. That's not a, you understand what I'm saying? So we deal with people that don't have any, there's no deficiency in them in that regard. We make them have a deficiency. Sulaim, you know the story of Sulaim? Sulaim, she actually converted her husband. Sulaim converted her husband because she saw qualities in her husband that should not be rejected in a man. So she saw potential in her husband that should not be rejected. But she made it conditional for him to marry her. He had to become a Muslim. He had to come into Islam. But for us to talk, and there's a lot of sisters that are doing that nowadays. They see non-Muslim brothers. In some cities is a scandal, controversy. But some sisters, they go to school with these brothers, and they develop relationships, and they see good qualities, and they have the power over them to a certain extent, and they use that power for the deen. And they know how to keep that balance. That's good. Some women, they know how to dominate the man. But if they dominate the man with that angle for Allah, that's awesome. If they dominate the man to destroy the man, that's what we see in the feminist movement. That's a problem. Right? But not everything in the feminist movement is bad. But there's this tendency now, especially, that the man is the enemy. That's a problem. So, again, this issue, when we say that there's no king except Allah, is going to bring equality. It's going to bring equality to the equation, equality and dignity. But in Islam, the role of the male and female is not equal. The dignity of the male and female is equal. Because in Islam, we believe in complementarity. Yeah, equity. We believe in equity and we believe in complementarity. I don't want to compete with you having a baby, or you know what I'm saying? It's like you have your thing, I have my thing. There's two different realms. I struggle with my struggle, you struggle with your struggle. I don't get a break from Salah. Women get breaks from Salah because of their physical situations. I have to have my own struggles, my own issues. You have your own struggles, your own issues.
The world has changed so much, it's hard to understand that. Even 100 years ago, men were considered as breadwinner. They have to go out, fight the war.
That's why I said that we need the models. We need more than one model. Because if we put the burden on our children and on our community, that is only one way, it'll crack immediately. Because also the man will crack and the woman will crack. Because the woman sometimes, there's some women, the women that grow up in a family where the woman has a bunch of brothers is different than the woman that it's a bunch of sisters. The brother actually, when there's a bunch of sisters, the brother will tend to be passive. When there's a bunch of brothers, the sister will tend to be assertive. And it's not that assertiveness and passiveness is always male and female, because it's not. Because there's some women, like you deal with some of the Palestinian mothers, those mothers are strong, but they're very tender too. From there, did you eat? But very strong. You have your role, go do your role, go do your thing, right? They have that strength. But we can't afford to live within these stereotypes, because the situation is like you said, that economically, the way that things are, they're very imbalanced economically. People work contractually. I know brothers that work on contracts. When those contracts are done, sometimes they have gaps of time. So if the only thing that they're seeing themselves is like, I'm the breadwinner, my meaning in life is only money, this, that. When that money disappears, you have no meaning. And the relationship also is open to being destroyed. Or for instance, some sisters became doctors or whatever. The brother's not a doctor, he's an engineer. But they have some compatibility on some other levels. And they choose to go into the relationship. So are you going to create an imbalance? She's making $500,000 a year. He's making 150, maybe 200,000, maybe. Sometimes 80, 90,000. I know a brother who's an engineer who his wife was making more than him. As a matter of fact, his wife carried him while he was building a business. That's just the reality, and they worked it out. So that's not going to help us. But here you see how the Aqidah issue, it begins to cross over into life. Because then indirectly they're talking about politics. When you start talking about this, there's no king except Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala, it changes the dynamics completely on the human level, on how we understand. Because in a lot of ways, we don't like to say it, but how we understand Allah, we imitate that. We talk about those qualities. If Allah is compassionate, we should be compassionate. If Allah is merciful, we should be merciful. Right? Like that. But in those cases, like we said, now there's another thing, like even the issue of ownership. Like in today's time, we don't talk about slavery. In the past, that was something that was talked about easy. Selling human beings, no issue. In today's time, we don't talk about that. So you have that tendency in the deen, the tendency towards liberation. That you find that, slavery and the dynamic of Islam was something completely different in the early phase, especially. Maybe some in the later history, there were some mistakes or some issues. But in the prophetic example, no, you find they were eliminating that. They were changing the society. For the males, for the women, for the poor, for the rich. The rich had to learn responsibility and so on and so forth. And so the issue comes back to ownership. When we start talking about ownership, what is real ownership? Right. And so that when we understand those things properly, we get a different type of lifestyle. Nowadays the employer will get a life insurance policy on the workers. They look at the workers as, and they used to do that in the past, but some companies, they do that, and the workers don't even know that they have a life insurance policy on the worker, and they collect when the worker dies. So those types of things, that comes into our vision of the world. Like, do we want to be in a situation like that? As Muslims, when we talk about ownership and who really has ownership, right now that's the issue. Privatization of beaches is tied into that. If we're saying Allah has the ownership, look at the difference between the lifestyle of the Native Americans and now what we have when it comes to dealing with the land and the earth and the resources. How things were plentiful. But when this concept of ownership, this country was rooted like that. They brought them a paper and they say, yeah, we own this now. We don't have that conception of ownership, period. You see what I'm saying? You think that how can you own the air and the land and the water with a piece of paper? That's how it was absurd to them. But now a new system has moved in that regard. But here, also it teaches us that despite these types of things that they're in place, at the end of the day, look, if you don't get any justice in this world, Allah owns this. At the end of the day, every human being will come to face death and accountability. And in these types of ideas about Allah, we have an understanding that some justice will come. Right? So if Allah owns everything, Allah is the one that takes account. Right? Sufyan, he said, like the Persian term, Sha'anan Shah. Right? The messenger of Allah, may Allah bless him and grant him peace, said, the man with whom Allah will be angriest is a man who calls himself the King of Kings. There's no king except Allah. Right? There's no king except Allah. And some from the signs of the last day is this issue, that the Khilafah will turn into that. That the political organization of the Muslims will turn into that. Kingdoms and people thinking they own the community and so on and so forth.
That wasn't 50, 70 years ago, there was no boundaries, right? There was no country.
Not countries,
I mean, you can go
not
anywhere.
nation
Yeah,
states.
yeah, you can travel to
Yeah.
without the passport. And that was not, it was like 100 years ago, not even that.
The movement was now even somebody was telling me recently that in Saudi Arabia, for you to have your children with you on under some contractual agreements with the government, that you have to pay $300 per person for them to be there. That's the level that we're at.
I didn't get it. What was
That in Saudi Arabia, under some because there's different contractual agreements, and then those contractual agreements have something to do with the citizenship and you being residing there. That in some of those agreements, for your children to be with you there, you have to pay a tax on each of them to be there. $300 in some cases per child. So you end up paying like $1,000-something a month if you have four children, for them to be there, 4 or 5 children. That's this is so when we start talking about this, you see there's two tendencies. One tendency, this tendency, you know, look, there's only Allah is king. That creates a different political system completely. Whereas you start, when you start talking about it in a different way, even the issue of ownership, like we said, if Allah is really the owner and Allah is Razik or Razak and gave us things, you begin to think about the natural world in a different way, like the rights of the poor, so to speak. Even in Islam, we have that. For instance, it makes a big difference. Like, in some places, I think, is it here in Chicago? I think in Chicago, in some parts of the city, they plant vegetables in the public, like kale and all that, and so you're able to just take, right? But if that's private property, can you take? You know what I'm saying? So it becomes the issue of ownership. It creates a lot of different dynamics. So who really owns, right? That becomes the question. So in another world, that's possible. We see that the Deen gives us some guidance in that regard. It gives us some guidance. It gives us a whole different way of thinking about things. Right? There's no disagreement that this title is forbidden to all of the creatures in the same way that the King of Kings is. Right? What is the title? The title is the master, right, of the kingdom. It is, however, permitted to be described as a king or master if what is intended is what is customarily understood by those terms. Right? So Allah says Allah sent Talut as a king. Right? In Bani Israel, they wanted that. They wanted to be like the other nations. Whereas, what is the example of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? What's the example of the Prophet amongst the people? Was he like a king, an authority, or Omar even? Yeah, even they say sometimes they say that the average person can come and get the Prophet. It's hard if you don't have any confidence in your people, or the people don't have confidence in you. Of course, you're just gonna have bodyguards and protection. That's how one of the issues that happened with Umar in that regard. He was amongst the people. He couldn't be distinguished. It was easy to get to him. But, the idea there is that, what kind of leadership do we want? And so Bani Israel in that time, they wanted to be like the other communities. And they got some of that. You know what I'm saying? Whether it was Dawood, some of that stuff came around, like the wanting to be like the other communities. But in Islam, we have an example of having your own identity. The Prophet ﷺ says, some people from my community were shown to me raiding in the way of Allah, riding the middle of the sea like kings of thrones, right? And that showed that there was some, that for Islam there will be some dominance. But what kind of system were they trying to bring? Was it enslaving other human beings? That becomes the question mark that we really have to fit in for ourselves. You know what I'm saying? That's not what Islam was dictating or Islam was mandating. Islam was, because the principle in Islam is that you can't force people to be Muslim. You also can't just take people's stuff, in an unjust way. But there is this issue of liberation. You know what I'm saying? That's something that, it needs some reflection upon. I want to read this paragraph and then just go back and then cut it short. And maybe ask, why does Allah say King of the day of repayment, or Maliki Yawmiddin, when the day of judgment has not yet arrived? How can he describe himself as being the king of something he has not yet brought into existence? The response to this is that the word used is an active participle. In the reality, it is in existence. It's in existence in the unseen, right? But here the argument is, how do you deal with the language? It's not there for us. The day of judgment is like right now we're sitting here in Oak Brook, Illinois. But we say Maliki Yawmiddin, like it's here present. So it's present in the unseen. That's an Aqidah point, that all of that stuff, is present at that level. The level of the unseen. Time for us in this dimension is another reality. So we don't measure the unseen from this reality. Just like, for instance, if you go under the water, the dynamics that are under the water are not the dynamics that are on the earth. Just if you go into space, the dynamics that are in space are not the dynamics that are on the earth. Just like, for instance, if you go to the North Pole, it's going to be different than what you encounter in the Amazon or what you encounter in Australia. You can be in one place of the earth is snowing. You can be in another place of the earth is hot like summertime. But in the way that in the contemporary mindset is that when it comes even to the laws of the unseen, we want to make them like the laws of the seen, like this. If you can't see it, it's absurd. But even scientifically, we know that that's not the case. I always use that example. That, okay, is there any rule that is in place? Well, we see, this is a rule. You don't see the rule, right? This is what's showing you, this going down is showing you there's a rule. For us, we believe in the unseen. And how we understand the unseen is by way of what is seen to us, the Quran in this case. The Quran comes to us by way of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and it comes to teach us, about Tawheed, and Tawheed teaches us about the reality of the world. And even in this case, this is teaching us about the whole concept of the political order in that case. Like, what are how do we deal with the people that have power? What is their responsibility and role, and so on and so forth. Tawheed and Risala and Khilafa, as Maulana Maududi has written. And so here, the point here is that, okay, from the matter of the unseen, the knowledge of the unseen, it exists. From the matter of this reality before us, no, it doesn't exist. And it's a language that's being used to indicate something that is to come, right? And so between us and that time period is fear and hope. Fear that we fall in bad favor with Allah, and hope that we fall, achieve something good with Allah. You get it? What I'm saying? That between the day of judgment and death, we have that sense of fear and hope. We fear we may not land right, so we're trying to ask Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala to aid us in the struggle of the world, and we have hope that we'll come out. Well, if we don't have those two things, we get into bad mental health. Suicide, this, that. If you don't have any sense of fear, it's whatever. And still, your life won't be okay. If it's just 100% fear, you know what I'm saying, with no hope, it can go any direction for you to the point of self-destruct. If it's just hope, everything is okay, there's no boundaries in that regard. So there has to be a balance between the two. So here, Malik, right? Just to Malik is coming back to the issue of master, right? Malik, and with no prolongation, Maliki, right? Maliki or Malik. Malik here is the master. Maliki is the one who is designated as the king. I want that to be clear in the mind, right? But also with all of these things that have been said, right? With all of these things that have been said with regard to ownership and dominion and power and so on and so forth. I personally lean to, trying to remove ourselves, the human being, out of this context. So I like the idea of, that there is, we're the kings of the earth. I like the concept of, that there is no king except Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. Abu Huraira also reported that the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam said, the most abased man in the sight of Allah is a man who calls himself the King of Kings. Imam Muslim added, there's no king except Allah. We should always ensure that we give Allah proper glory and stature and this and that. This is, important because within the realm of Christianity, this is something that they failed in. And they began to give attributes of God to human beings. Some of the human beings nowadays, what do? What are the youth saying now? The God of this. What are some of the people saying? You see, I'm a goddess.
Yeah, they like it's in the computer world. They say, there's an administrator who has the rights of
Yeah,
all the system.
yeah,
I'm the God.
yeah.
I have the rights of on all the
Yeah.
system and computer, like the full authority of all.
Even they had the emoji. So the more that these things, they overlap with each other, the qualities of God with human beings, and the more we get loose on that, the more we start opening up the door to shirk, right? And that's the reality. I want to end. Was this clear? I know it was a little technical. Did we leave with some clarity? I didn't want to leave without some sense of clarity. But I think that, let me see, we should.
Tafhim is not available in PDF, right? You have to.
It is. No, it is.
It is?
Yeah.
There are audiobooks on.
Even I can give you the one that we have in PDF. It's not the.
It seems like the language is something that I can understand. Maybe able to.
Oh no, this is Qurtubi though.
Oh, this is the.
This is Qurtubi. Yeah, this is Qurtubi. So what we have is that we can move on to this next time. It is you alone that we worship, right? The meaning of ibadah, the meaning of worship, and so on and so forth, all comes into this. But أقول قولي هذا استغفر لي ولكم الحمد لله رب العالمين. استغفر الله وأتوب إليه.